Hello, dear beloveds. It is such a joy to be part of this incredible event. I'm sure Bronte's going to be hearing that a lot today, but she really has pulled off something quite spectacular, bringing together some of my favourite people in the whole world, and certainly some of the most exciting emerging leaders in this space of spiritual entrepreneurship and just spiritual leadership generally, which is why I made a decision to focus on spiritual leadership as part of this, because it's certainly a topic very close to my heart, and it's something that I wanted to speak about in lots of different ways. So this week I also had an article published in Savannah East, which was on spiritual leadership. So it seems like an appropriate thing to be able to have a conversation about this again and kind of continue that conversation. I'm just making sure that I'm going live in the right place. If everyone can confirm that I am actually where I'm meant to be. If you haven't seen, Lisa Smith and I have just arrived from Melbourne to Canada. I'm like, where are we right now? Yeah, we have made it to Vancouver Island. And so I'm a little bit vague, but I'm hoping that I'm currently going live in the right group. Yes, there I am, double checked. Okay, now I can focus on what I'm doing. So yeah, so Lisa and I got here sometime yesterday. It's currently 4 o'clock on Wednesday here in Nanaimo on Vancouver Island, and we are here for the Science and Spirituality Conference, which is another kind of great lead-in to this conversation that I want to have today around spiritual leadership, because there is a great decision in being here that is around my role as a spiritual leader. So I made the choice to travel all the way across the world to come for 5 days to an event that includes the leaders in my field: Greg Braden, Joe Dispenza, Bruce Lipton, Lyndon Taggart, the channel Lee Carroll, who's channeling the entity Cryon, and to be in a community of people for whom spirituality and science is an exciting thing that they want to be part of. So it's a really epic trip. It's not a cheap trip, although the event itself is not expensive. Of course, getting here and staying here for 8 days, being here is part of my commitment to myself as a spiritual leader, which is that I never stop learning. And I think one of the most dangerous kinds of spiritual leaders or spiritual teachers are those who believe that they don't need to be learning, because that's going to be more explained as I introduce you to a formula I have for spiritual leadership and spiritual power more generally. So I made a decision some time ago, as soon as I saw the details of this conference, in fact, that I had to be here, because my teachers are people that I, like the people that I mentioned who are here, and other people like Caroline Mason, Marion Williamson, and of course getting access to them is not as easy as picking up the phone or sending an email. So putting myself in front of them in small groups of 1,200, for example, is a really powerful way where I can get access to the latest research, the things that are happening, and to keep myself nourished, to keep filling my own cup. So having that idea of any great leader, any great spiritual teacher should be someone that you know has the humility to continue improving and increasing their understanding, their own knowledge, and more importantly, deepening into their own mystical practices and experiences. So it doesn't matter if your teacher is in spiritual entrepreneurship or if they are in spiritual leadership in any other way. To me, a really great teacher is someone who is demonstrating the humility that they do not believe they've got it all sorted out, and they keep putting themselves before their great teachers and before God with that attitude of humility. So I want to introduce you to my formula of spiritual leadership so that you can, I guess, look at what it is for me to be a spiritual leader. And then I'm going to talk a little bit to the article that was published this week about the challenges or the dark shadow side of spiritual leadership, and how when we know these things, we can actually equip ourselves and prepare ourselves. Because if you're in this group, there's a good chance you're a spiritual leader. And I spoke about this in the article. It's like we are in a spiritual zeitgeist. As Caroline Mace tells us, the second great mystical age is upon us, and we are waking up at a rapid rate, and it's vital for all of those of us, especially women, who can must lead, and we must be unafraid to overcome our self-doubt, to step into our spiritual self-esteem, and to own our power to serve. Because if we sit back in our self-doubt, those of us who have access to the truth that the infinite is always supporting us, even if we have days where that's hard to remember, we must be willing to do that on behalf of those people who don't even know that there is an inherent interconnectedness to life, that there is such a thing as God or infinite unlimited consciousness, that the life situation they're in is not fixed, that the shitty abusive marriage that they're part of is not something you have to stay in. You know, women who awaken have a duty to be leaders in their community, whether that's an online community or whether that's in their home or whether that's in their school or wherever it is, to lead by demonstration. And when we put down our own lack of self-worth, that is the greatest act of service to the planet that we can possibly embody at this time. And how do we do that? How do we build the spiritual self-esteem? Well, first of all, we have to be willing to see ourselves as God. We have to be willing to change our mind about ourselves. And the only way to do that is through devotion. The only way is to spend time each day outside of the illusion through practices like meditation and contemplation and prayer and reading sacred texts and reminding ourselves of our own truth, our own true nature. I can feel that this conversation could go in lots of different tangents, but I want to keep bringing it back to that spiritual leadership. If you are called to be on the spiritual path at this time, this particularly extraordinary time in human awakening, then there is a very, very good chance that you are a spiritual leader. And any excuse or any reason that you're hiding from that is going to be related to the ego's attempts to keep you playing small. And I've written a little book, an ebook called You Were Made to Be Glorious, and that really is the truth of it. Your true nature is glorious, infinite, unlimited, completely optimized. There is no need for you to be in suffering. There's no need for you to be in poverty. And there's certainly no need for you to be in self-doubt. These things are not inherent to our nature. These are learnt behaviors, fear-based behaviors that we've embodied over time through our intergenerational inheritance, through our literal DNA. But we do not have to sit and stay in that place. We have a choice. We always have a choice. And so to deepen into our devotion is a very profound practice of the spiritual leader, because we are going to learn the formula now, and we're going to go through a little experience of this as we go along, of true spiritual power. The first step is humility. The first step is, I can of my own self do nothing. And if we ever get confused about this, we simply have to remember that it is not our will, but thy will that will be done, and that we are the very lucky servant of the infinite that has a vision for our life, or a vision for itself that it will express through our little life. And that if we can be comfortable with that, if we can put down our own agendas and move into a state of visionary intuition, as Caroline Myss calls it, which is accepting the truth that we are not the ones here making a decision about what it is that happens. Now, that may sound like you are being very passive, but in fact it's the opposite, because mostly what happens is we receive visionary intuition, we get very clear on our life purpose, and then our spiritual self-esteem is not intact. Our ego gets in there and it stops us from taking action, and we think that may be, that's actually self-determination. No, that's just unmet subconscious fear. It's our job all of the time, as far as possible, to recognize the difference between that limiting subconscious fear belief that's sitting there just below the surface versus what is our intuition. And I've written about that as well, because that question of what is fear and what is intuition is a very critical one to your role as a spiritual leader. You have to know the difference between a fear-based choice and a loving choice, and that just simply takes practice. The practices of devotion are the way that we do this. So the idea of humility first, I can of my own self do nothing, is the acceptance that you are both nothing and you are everything. And in fact, as Joe Dispenza tells us, becoming nothing is actually the greatest power that we have to create everything. We have to go through the phases, and his phases are so beautiful. When you go into meditation with Joe, and I encourage you all to do so because he has a very unique style and it's a very powerful practice, you begin with the idea that I'm something. I've got this identity. I'm going to take this identity into the world. This identity is me. I run this. I do this. I want to be this. I want to have that. And it's all based on our association with the dream. It's an ego-identified self, and that is the beginning point for many of us. We might go, I want to become an entrepreneur, and it's because I want to have this, I want to have that, and I want this car, and I want that, and I want this much money. And there's nothing wrong with that, except for our belief is that those are the things that are going to make us happy. So we come into a state where we are something, and that something is actually a tiny little fragment of what is possible for us, but we're stuck in that. So we're stuck in that belief that that is the limit of who and what we are. So even if we're aspirational, we're still sitting inside a limit, and we are unable to see beyond that limit. We come into our devotional practices, and here I'm using the specific example of a meditation with Job, but all of our practices do this, and we move into a state of the void, and we become nothing. We give away that ego-identified self to merge back into infinite, unlimited consciousness, and we simply feel ourselves expand beyond identity and expand beyond yearning and expand beyond goals and desires and intentions and aims. And if you'd like to have an experience of that now, why don't you, if you're safe to do so, close down your eyes with me. And just closing the eyes and deepening the breath. Perhaps taking an inhale through the nose for 5 counts, holding. And then exhaling out through the mouth or the nose, whatever's comfortable. And extending that exhalation for as long as is comfortable for your own body. And then holding, just for a moment. Now letting your breath maintain its own natural rhythm. And with eyes closed and breath deepened, you've already signified to your physiology that you're very safe. You've moved out of that chaotic high beta brainwave state. And now, just by taking 2 fingers to the center of your chest, and we won't go into full heart coherence yet, but we will do that a little bit later on, we're just signifying to our consciousness that we want to be attuned to this little brain, the little brain in the anatomical heart, rather than the conscious reasoning mind. We're moving out of that head space into that heart space. And just feeling the breath expanding the electromagnetic field around your Anahata chakra. Just this simple act alone of withdrawing our attention from the superficial world moves us into, or the beginnings of that state of nothingness. From that state of nothingness, that beautiful, expansive state, where we let go of agendas with God, where we stop turning up to God with a shopping list, we begin to truly meet ourselves in that unlimited place. There is nothing to limit us. We are in no time and no place. And from that state, Joe tells us we can become anything. And that anything then is where we begin to encode consciousness. And this is a term I've just come across in Debbie Ford's book called Your Holiness. And it's a truly beautiful book. If you don't know Debbie Ford, she really began the conversation about shadow work in this contemporary age. And she died 5 years ago. But she was posthumously published. And this book is called Your Holiness. And it's a love letter to the idea of prayer, and prayer is a devotional practice, and she talks about encoding consciousness. Vishen Lakhiani talks about it as engineering consciousness, but regardless of how you think about it, this is where we might also call what Caroline Myss calls co-creative intuition, where we're starting to build consciousness according to how we would like it to be, not just from our automatic subconscious program that likes to tell us how little and small and finite we are, especially when we start to do amazing spiritual leadership things. We tend to hit an upper limit, yes, to use Gay Hendricks' term. And there we bump our head up on that upper limit, and we might decide, well, that's fate. I wasn't meant to go along that path because here all this shit's rising up and my partner's crappy with me and my kids are getting sick, and obviously I've gone off on the wrong tangent and my intuition's telling me that I should just stay home and not try and do this thing. And actually that's just your fear. Your upper limit is just you're smacking your head up against it, and you stay inside of that upper limit. But if you're able to recognize that, and this once again comes from the practices of devotion, because we create enough space around us that we're no longer sitting inside the dream believing its evidence is real, we can actually move outside of that dreamlike state, and we can actually become attuned to the truth of what we are, which is 5-dimensional, pure consciousness. And here is where we begin to create. And we create from love rather than fear. We're not creating from our reactive subconscious program. We're beginning to see ourselves as that anything is possible state of being. And here we may become quite comfortable with taking action that does not have necessarily a logical evidence to it. So we get inspired to take a particular action. And this is once again leadership, where we're asked to go beyond our comfort zone. We're asked to go beyond the known, and we're asked to move outside of a state of being or a state of affairs of our life that is familiar. This is where we may notice that we're rocking the boat in our own families. We may make other people uncomfortable. And the spiritual leader must be very comfortable with being not approved of by everybody. You really have to decide where it is you place your value. Is it an internal thing or an external thing? Is someone's opinion of you going to be enough to derail your spiritual leadership? Because if you're still in the state of affairs where your partner doesn't agree with you, or a friend says, what do you think you're doing? Or any of those things, you will fall over even before you begin. If you're able to internalize your sense of self-worth, or at least initially use the language of handing it over to God and only let God be your guide. If you don't like the word God or you don't use it, please substitute that for whatever works for you. All I mean by that word is infinite, unlimited consciousness. If you're willing to place your spiritual self-esteem inside of your relationship with God, you will not be so easily rocked. And I love that Amanda says she rocked the boat this morning. J Ma, dear one, victory to the mother, because when we are willing to break habits of behavior, that's actually where we're going places. That's a good evidence that we're changing things, and we're not doing that to be destructive, but we may have to destroy something, a certain pattern of behavior, a passive-aggressive relationship, a need to be approved of externally, in order to be willing to meet ourselves as what Joe then describes, everything. So we move from something to nothing to anything to everything. And this is where humility comes in. I am everything and I am nothing. And this idea that we are everything, we are unlimited consciousness, we are God. We are not a small tiny fragment of God, we are God. And what it is that we are here to learn in this life on Earth School is to remember ourselves as that. So why do we begin with humility? Surely God is all powerful, so surely we begin with power. Well, no, because our power, which will come later, is the power that has been invested in us by our God consciousness, not by our human force. So first we become unafraid of humility. What will happen is the ego will say, well, that's humiliation. Humility is humiliation. And this is where we'll often see people who start out on their spiritual path, or even quite far along their spiritual path, will do things like eradicate their teachers from their history. They will omit their lineage, their teaching lineage. And Nisha Moodley talks about this at length, and it's very important to me because it's been done to me a number of times, but it's also something that I see in other places, which is if you are unwilling to recognize the lineage, your spiritual lineage, who has taught you, who are your teachers, who are those people who've led you to the place where you stand now, that is because your ego is telling you that is humiliation. If I need a teacher, then I am not all powerful, and therefore people will think that I'm not perfect and they won't buy my thing, whatever that is. Whereas for me, acknowledging my teachers, and you'll notice even if you listen to me talking now, that pretty much everything I say is referenced back to where I heard it or understood it or who I think is doing it best, because it is vital to me that we are not omitting from our story where we have come. In fact, me being here, for example, I want to shout that from the rooftops. I'm investing in my spiritual awakening because that makes me a better leader for my students. And that knowledge transfer and that experience transfer is far more powerful when we are willing to acknowledge who are my inspirations, either formally or informally. Who is it that is guiding my work? And acknowledging our teachers is one of the most powerful acts of humility that we can invest in, rather than humiliation, which is what the ego will say. Oh, no, you just have to appear as though all your ideas are original and they've come out of the void and you just made all of this up. If we make peace with the idea that there are no original ideas, there is nothing new, everything is one, everything has been and always will be in the mind of God, we are simply being inspired to speak about a certain thing in a certain way by that God consciousness, then we'll find we can begin to access true power. And that's where we're getting to. So when your ego is afraid of humiliation, look at what you're defending. What are you afraid to lose? Is it the need to be right? Is it the need to be the original first ever person to talk about this thing and that no one else has ever talked about it? Is it this idea that you have to de-identify the people that have inspired you or taught you as a way to kind of make it look like this has all come out of thin air? All of these are acts of the ego trying to keep you in a state of avoiding humiliation. And in fact, if we go in the other direction and we shout from the rooftops what we have done, investing in our own professional development, being unafraid to have an empty cup. I am willing to learn more, go further. And this is really, everything that I teach in my program, the third level, it's for women who know that they're amazing at what they do as spiritual leaders, but they want to be better. And if you ever stop wanting to be better, then that's where your ego has really stepped in and is trying to tell your story for you. So be unafraid of owning the fact that wherever you are, there's always further to go. And that's what gets me out of bed in the morning is, oh my God, how more amazing and epic can I be? Not, oh, I'm shit and therefore, I don't want to kind of talk about the fact that I need teachers because people might think I'm not good enough and blah, 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 blah. It's like, no, I'm here to learn more, to know more, to experience more, to deepen into my mystic. And I'm very excited. I'm very excited to get into that room tomorrow. Who have we got first? I think it's Greg Braden tomorrow. I may have a super tiny, enormous crush on him. So Lisa's all about Joe. Not physically though. We've clarified that. It's not about his hot body. Anyway, she's in the bedroom. She might be trying to quietly giggle right now. So I've got some thoughts around the next step then, okay? So after we are unafraid of humility, which is a really big step, by the way, it's not something you're going to resolve in one day. This is every moment of your life. The kind of hallmarks of being afraid of humility, the humiliation state that the ego is telling us, so things like jealousy, possessiveness, trying to be right in all situations, the lack of asking questions and investigating more. These are all kind of signs, those lower, baser emotions, the kind of envy, the anger, all really good signs of humiliation and of the fear of humiliation and the fear of humility. So when we move into that state and we can start to practice being humble, prayer is a really beautiful practice of doing that. Remembering your true infinite nature is a really good practice to do that. We move into grace. And this is where it gets really good. Because once you start to experience the state of grace, you sort of begin to understand why humility is required. And why it's worth working for and fighting for, because grace, in my understanding, is what God feels like. So to be able to feel that state of grace in your ordinary life, usually through devotion, not usually walking along the street, although we may have had moments like that where suddenly we're infilled with grace for no reason at all, that sense of inner peace, joy, union, overcoming any sense of separation. It's happens in an instant from time to time, and beauty can do that for us. So where we're staying right now, there are just the most incredible fir trees and pine trees. We actually have a nest of bald eagles. In one of them, a mama and a papa and two babies up there. And there are moments where you could be looking at those sorts of things and suddenly you have this peak experience and you are invested with so much love that you are embodying God consciousness without any separation. Usually those moments are fleeting. But with devotion, we can cultivate that experience of grace. And grace is not only a byproduct or result of humility. Experiencing grace encourages humility. So experiencing grace allows us to become more humble, because what could we possibly want from the dream? What would we be fighting for? What are we wanting from the illusory 3D reality when we can have that feeling? That feeling doesn't exist in the world. It doesn't happen as a result of human stuff. It happens as a result of going inwards to the world within the world and meeting yourself as what you truly are, which is God. So grace is typified by those feelings that do not need external evidence. They're not because you got something or someone was nice to you. You can experience grace when the whole world is telling you you're wrong. And I know that firsthand, because the spiritual leader will not always be approved of. This is one of the things I wrote about in the article, and I'll share the link with you later, is that you will be made a false idol of. So initially the spiritual leader might be put up on a pedestal by someone. And then they get knocked off that pedestal when that other person goes on their own awakening or whatever happens, or they need to judge or blame someone because life is changing and they're scared of how their life is changing, or they go into fear and their ego gets all up in their face and they say, that person, she's the one that made you look at your subconscious fear and now your life is shit and you think you have to leave your husband and you're suddenly feeling like you need to leave your job and blah, well, she must be wrong. And so the ego will look for the messenger because that's the easiest thing rather than taking responsibility. So if we let ourselves be put up on a pedestal, it's going to be a very, very bumpy fall back down to earth. So once again, humility is the antidote to that. But to recognize that even when people are saying, you're the problem, you've caused this, you have done this, that you can still be in a state of grace, because grace is not an externally evidenced emotion. We're not looking for something outside of us. In fact, the opposite of that is true. We're going within to meet ourselves in that state of grace. And that's why we have to be in devotional practices, even if it's for 5 minutes each day, where we withdraw our attention from the dream and we come to meet God, because God is not in the dream. God is not in the dream. So you cannot meet yourself in true devotion in the busy of your life. Ultimately, as Caroline Myss tells us, the mystic develops the spiritual sight that allows us to privilege spiritual sight first. So we see the world through symbolic sight before we see it through physical sight. And that can be done all of the time, where we can actually cultivate the state of being where we can see both as the mystic and the human in the same moment, which is quite a remarkable gift, yes, and it's something worth working towards. Once again, grace is what affords us that. To see as God sees is what grace is, and that requires us to turn up every damn day. So the steps to spiritual leadership so far: humility, which allows us to attain grace. Grace also allows us to deepen into humility. That grace then leads us to something glorious, and that is power. And this word is a big word, and it may trigger, not a word I like, but it may trigger some people to think about that word power, because so many of us are so separate from our power. And what is the power that I am speaking of? The only power I have, and I have it, and I love that I have it, and I own that I have it, is the power to know I have no power except for God's power. And that takes us back to humility. I can of my own self do nothing. It is not my power. But the power I have is to see how much of myself I can overcome, how much of my ego I can put down in order to be the fullest expression of God's power in the world. And this is visionary intuition, as Caroline Myss tells us. This is where we have put down our personal agendas with God, and we have said, use me. Let my life be what you want to birth into the world, and I will trust you, and I will trust myself, which are one and the same, of course, enough to be willing to take action where I am called to take action. And this is the hallmark of the spiritual leader. She is in the world. She is doing. She is making shit happen. You know, I train women as spiritual leaders, and we call these women priestesses, because the archetype of the priestess is in the world. She's not out there. She's not, you know, on a cloud, in a fluffy cloud, in a temple, avoiding reality. She is here in the world. She is making the babies, and she is making the food, and she is keeping the house, and she's working, and she's tending to the souls of her community. And she is that. She is that bridge between heaven and earth. And the priestess is an embodied spirituality, an embodied divinity. And this is what we are, women, as spiritual leaders. We are those who are in the world saying it is possible to be human and divine at the same time. And it is possible to serve whilst you are also taking care of a home and a life, and making things happen at that level. And that we never use our domestic sphere as a reason not to show up. And in fact, my domestic sphere is an anchor for my life. I get to go off and have these incredible spiritual pilgrimages and take women to Bali and train them twice a year. And I get to go, you know, for this year, for example, to Tuscany and have these incredible adventures. But it's my domestic anchor that allows me to feel that I can take off and fly. So it's very, very important that we don't use our life as an excuse not to step into our spiritual leadership. You know, if you look for excuses, you'll find them. And if you look for reasons to show up to God, you'll find them, and they're much more powerful. So my power is my power to serve. And my power to serve will call me to be more and more powerful in the world. So the act of embodying God's power is not to give everything away. My abundance has increased 1 billion times since stepping onto this path of service. When you say no to God, you shut down the flow of abundance towards you. Now, I'm getting very close to the end, and I just saw that Bronte had said we can make a little offer at the end, and I'm so grateful for that. And I do want to let you know that the third level, which is my year-long program to train women as spiritual leaders, contemporary priestesses, and to really embody the priestess in the world. The next round begins in July. That was completely sold out, and someone has just postponed their enrollment until next year. So we do have a place available in the third level beginning of July 2nd. That program will change your life. Many of the women speaking today are graduates or current students of that program, which makes my heart very full. This is a qualification program to train as a professional intuitive guide, but it is a whole of life program. Currently, the investment is $6,995. Next intake, that goes up to $10,000. So if you are thinking about it, if you'd like more information, you can head to the website and look up the third level, or send me a message and I'll follow up with you and let you know more about it. So just to finish up then, yes, humility to grace to power. And power, to be unafraid of our power, is spiritual self-esteem. It is the greatest act of service in the world to allow God to move you and to serve in that way. It's my privilege to serve you. Thank you, dear Bronte. I hope today is mind-blowingly glorious and I'm very grateful to be here. Have a beautiful day.